Hey guys, this is the Uber Elite, and this is my Slave Driver Pledge of Hands build in the Hardcore Legion League, currently level 94. I'm making this video to showcase not only the Slave Driver Spectres, which are very powerful and do extremely well on clear with a Pledge of Hands, being able to clear legions just as well as Solar Guards, if not even better, but also to showcase the mechanics of this build because it's using a lot of interesting things that I think is pretty neat. But as you can see here, the damage is pretty good. The clear is pretty decent. They are able to pretty much almost full clear legions every single time on maps. So yeah, these guys are actually pretty damn good, and their bossing is pretty incredible. Definitely one of my favorite Spectres now. They are pretty squishy though in comparison to things like Solar Guards, but they do serve as a nice replacement for Cannibal Fire Eaters, since Cannibal Fire Eaters were nerfed due to what I assume is the Act 1 to 3 rework, putting them into the earlier acts. But yeah. Anyways, here is a Hydra Kill. And you can see here that Hydra is, she dies fast. There's a lot of damage on these guys, and there is still plenty of room to get more damage. You could still very easily get more if you wanted. But yeah, let's move on to the build. So this is my Slave Driver character. As you can see, the Slave Drivers are kind of ADHD in Hideout. They really have some interesting AI, actually. One of the more interesting things for me to look at, I don't know how this actually affects their combat, but they have some sort of fleeing AI. So as you can see, they actually tend to like to split up as they end up clumping up somehow. But yeah, okay, so they do like to split up a lot and stay away from each other. It is very, very interesting to look at, and I'm very curious how this affects their AI in combat. But as to the actual gearing, we are using Pledge of Hands. This is chosen for the reason that Greater Spell Echo causes them to repeat 4 times with Spell Echo, which does stack with this. And for each repeat, it will do 35% more damage, as well as have 50% ink AoE. So what this means is that the Spectres will be actually closer to the pack in order to cast their initial cast onto the mob. And then the next cast will be bigger, the next cast will be even bigger than that, so on and so forth. And the result is that you will actually hit way more of the pack because of the greater spell echo, causing the cast to become bigger with more ink AoE. So very, very useful for clear, very noticeable, and without it, it makes legions pretty awkward to clear, and maps in general kind of awkward to clear. They are just so nice for clear. I would highly recommend using these. In comparison to something like Solar Guards would just end up firing their beam 4 times in the exact same spot, so it doesn't really help Solar Guards. I would put these almost at an equal level of to Solar Guards in terms of clear if you're using them in Pledge of Hands. If you're not using a Pledge of Hands, I think Solar Guards are still better. But these guys come with the advantage of having way higher single target than Solar Guards do. So, yeah, this is pretty neat. As for the other links, Spell Echo, as I said, you kind of need this for the extra repeat, and you need this for the extra cast speed. Lightning Pen, just an overall good link. POB will say that Shaper DPS-wise, this is worse than others, but I just find this more consistent because of the fact that sometimes you're running resistance maps, sometimes things have endurance charges, sometimes there's elemental resistance auras. Just overall, it's a good link to be running, just for the sake of consistency, especially because of the fact that you're not always going to have equilibrium up. Elemental Focus over Control Destruction because I want them to be able to crit. Right now I am not using a Kingmaker, which would give them some crit multi, as you can see here. This would give them 50 crit multi, but they don't have incredibly high crit, but it would allow them to still be able to crit, and it's just overall a better damage link if you're not shocking that much. And realistically, I don't think these guys will have that consistent of shocks, nor will I think it'll matter that much when it should matter. Minion damage, obvious link. I mean, if you're not using minion damage, you better have a good reason for it. And the last link is faster casting. So this is not a normal thing. Normally, if you're using something like Victoria's Shield, you absolutely don't need to use this. But this is because I don't have all that much additive faster casting. And these guys start out with negative 65 cast speed. So they start out with 65% additive reduced cast speed. So if you don't have a lot of cast speed from jewels or your gear, faster casting actually ends up being a very good link. Technically speaking, Control Destruction would be a better link than this, but this also means that they don't stay in place as much, and I've just overall found that having faster casting in links just improves them so much that I don't really want to get rid of it without having an insane amount of jewels with cast speed. So, yeah, very big deal. And so the other thing to figure out with Pledge of Hands is what I would do with all of this mana. So one would immediately say MOM, but I don't see a reason to go MOM when you could go with auras such as Wrath and Zealotry on Generosity, which is one of the biggest reasons of these guys. These are lightning damage, which means you actually get to use the Wrath aura for another multiplier. Usually you don't have a lot of good auras to run, but because you have Zealotry and Wrath, that adds a surprising amount of damage. But after that, you don't really have any mana. So what do you do with it? Well, I solved this with a Militant Faith Jewel, which is not a common thing to use. So the main thing here was to get a minion attack and cast speed one. There's other things you can get, such as increased effect of non-curse auras or anything else. And I got it with the name Avarius on it. So High Templar Avarius turns keystones into converting 80% of your maximum mana to twice that much armor. So if I take out the jewel real quick, you'll see that I have only 2,800 armor. With my armor scaling, I have Soul of Steel, I have Bravery, I have some armor nodes in the Marauder, and I have Vigil, as well as probably a couple others like this. But if I put this jewel in, it turns my minion instability, also turns my avatar fire, so pick either one. It turns that into almost 5,000 armor. But it lowers my mana to the point where I need a new way to sustain, because it lowers my mana regen by like over 80%. As for the stats, this is giving me elemental resistance per 10 devotion and minion attack and cast speed. Minion attack and cast speed, as I mentioned before, is pretty good. You can check your devotion count here. I have 50. You'll probably have 50 in this area. There's not really any point in pathing differently for it because the benefits aren't that good, and all the additional effects for 150 devotion on the notables just cost way too much for how much it would take to get them. So the number ends up not mattering as much. And it is worth noting that if you really want a specific role, like something like minion attack and cast speed, as well as increased effective non-curse auras for maximum damage, you could buy one of those and you could divine it without changing those roles, and you'll be able to change the name and the number, but the number doesn't matter. So that's how I'm making use of the mana. And then to make up for the fact that I am massively lowering my mana, I'm using Devouring Diadem to get Eldritch Battery. I'm not using MOM. I'm basically just saying, hey, I'm just going to always have Energy Shield recharge of 43.8 per second, so that I basically always have mana, unless for some reason I'm constantly animation canceling my Holy Flame Totem or something else. or I'm running like a no regen map or something like that. And even with that, this has a Feast of Flesh, which is pretty nice for mapping. It will basically full heal you every time it goes off. Every corpse that it eats heals you for 400 life and 400 energy shield, and destroys up to 10 corpses. So pretty nice for that, although it's pretty annoying when you're trying to drop some corpses and flesh offering them, only to have it be eaten. That part's annoying, but able to be dealt with. Especially if I change things around so that I can run a spell cascade, Desecrate. In the helmet, I'm running Solitude Wrath, as I mentioned before, both on Generosity, and I also have Flesh and Stone in here. You do not need to worry about it being linked to Generosity. It does not do anything. It does not even support the skill whatsoever. And this means that I have 100% of my mana reserved without taking a single mana reservation node or having a single mana reservation item outside of that. I am also running Haste because I got an Ol's Uprising. This is totally unnecessary. I would normally just use a normal amulet, but I really wanted to min-max this build. I had a lot of currency, so I'm like, you know what? There's a Haste Ol's Uprising for 8 Exalts. I want to buy this. I want to try this out. I've never used an Ol's before. And it gives increased flash charges granted by nearby enemies, so why not? And Haste is probably the best third aura you can get, offensively speaking, because, again, they scale really well with cast speed, as well as it gives you attack speed and some movement speed. It's also worth noting that because of this, Haste is actually activating Commander of Darkness for me, which is giving me a pretty substantial overcap. I am able to run Elemental Weakness and not worry about not having a Curse Flask up unless I get double cursed. So that is very, very useful. Outside of that, I mean, if you don't have an Ol's Uprising, you will probably just be able to get like something like 70 life, 16 all res or something on the amulet. So basically the same thing in terms of resistances. As for links, Flesh Offering and increased duration, and of course, why would I scale armor? Of course, I'm using Val Molten Shell and Molten Shell. Both of them manually casted because if you trigger a Molten Shell while you have Val Molten Shell up, well, it's going to replace your Val Molten Shell, and then suddenly your 15-second duration 10k shield is suddenly 3-second duration 3k shield, and then you end up going into a pack thinking you have Val Molten Shell up, and then you die. Totally didn't happen to me, by the way. I totally didn't lose a character to this. I don't know what you're talking about. Equilibrium skill of choice is Holy Flame Totem. Holy Flame Totem is very good. You cannot link Curse on Hit to it normally, but I have a Curse on Hit ring acquired from a Lightning Items Delve, only available from that. I actually self-found this, which was really, really lucky. Finding good ones of these is pretty hard. If I didn't have this, I would probably just be running Elemental Weakness on hit gloves on my Guardian, which actually do work. Desecrate, obvious. Worth noting that I have this on my left click, so how I'm able to walk is that if you do not have attack in place held down, you actually cannot cast Desecrate. But if you press attack in place, suddenly you can cast it. So what I did was I actually rebound my attack in place and put all of the things that I would normally always press attack in place for, just to set them to always attack without moving. And then I actually rebound the key for that to something like, say, F. So now by pressing F and clicking, I can actually cast it. So that was my way of working with my brain, because sometimes when I'm using movement skills, I will automatically press the shift key. And so that would cause me to cast Desecrate a lot. And that's how I worked around it. Convocation is pretty obvious. The way I play this character is I usually just leap around, and I'm constantly pressing Convocate as I leap into packs. And Leap Slam is the movement skill of choice. It actually feels very, very good now, especially once you get into the rhythm of not having the slow Leap Slam. It is very, very, very nice, because you just basically hold down left click and sleep around. Worth noting, if you're watching this and you try to do that on Cyclone, I think they fixed this by now, but it used to be that if your Leap Slam is fast enough and you Cyclone a lot, you would get disconnected for too many actions doing that. You don't get that on Summoner because we're slow. And we also have Vigilant Strike in the same links. The reason we don't have Fortify linked to Leap Slam is because, well, I don't like to rely on that. I want something reliable, and Vigilant Strike also makes my minions more tanky. So, this is because I have the Vigil Jewel, which means that whenever I hit with Vigilant Strike, it causes Vigilant Strike to fortify you and nearby allies for 12 seconds, and that 12 seconds is baseline. This is increased by the Fortify duration on the Vigilant Strike gem itself, which is why I've leveled it to 2020. So we get 37-second Fortifies, which really helps because Slave Drivers actually have a pretty low HP pool in comparison to most Spectres, and it helps keep my Guardian alive, as well as my Chaos Golem. The Guardian and the Chaos Golem are linked to Empower and Minion Life, just for survivability. I chose Chaos Golem because I was using zombies before, and I realized, why should I worry about zombies when every time they die, like, they have 20k HP, they die, they're just... and they don't really do that much damage. They do damage, but not that much. Why would I do that when I can just get more damage instead for my minions? And yeah. It's basically sacrificing 3 Fizz Res for a much more reliable 5 Fizz Res because the Chaos Golem has 2.5 times the life of zombies, which have 20k HP. So yeah. It's also very easy to get a level 21 Chaos Golem because of the cards that give 21 Golems. So, overall, just better in my opinion. And that should be it for the links. As for the gearing, Devouring Diadem, Pleasure Fan's already been explained. Gloves have a lot of decks on them, so I can run haste. Ideally, I would like some gloves where I can craft some minion damage on them instead, but working on that at the moment. Unset Ring, probably don't need it, though it does help with socket space. I just have really high life. I actually found this myself and annulled open a prefix for mana to get more armor. Just life resistances. You can get a minion damage one from Delve. You can't craft that, but yeah. Already mentioned this, only comes from lightning item rooms for the conductivity on hit. And if I didn't have this, I'd probably just buy some shitty corrupted Ellie weakness on hit gloves for my Guardian and use that. The chest, again, only available from Delve, is a +1 rare Spectre chest. If you can't get this, you would probably use something like this Mortis. Because that's the other way to get +1 Spectre. Also, actually, technically has more damage, but yeah. I was lucky enough to get this for pretty cheap. I would try to avoid evasion bases because coloring that is going to be a pain for pretty obvious reasons. You would probably need at least like 4, maybe 3 off color depending on what you have, but yeah. These are pretty annoying to get. Belt, resistances, life, I mean, what else are you gonna get other than like maybe reduced flash charges used or something? The jewel inside of it is very important, actually. So, Slave Drivers have base resistances of 0 fire, 40 cold, and 0 lightning. What this means is that with our standard setup, Raise Spectre gives 30 Ellie res, the tree that we use gives 15 Ellie res, and then if they're in our aura range, which extends to about the full screen other than like this corner in the top left as well as this corner in the top right. So they're pretty much always in our aura range. But what this means is that while their cold is capped and even overcapped, their fire and lightning res is only 65. So it's pretty important to get some minion Ellie res. Ideally you get 10 so that they're just barely capped. Even more than that is ideal because sometimes they do get cursed and minions do not have any way of dealing with curses. Although we do have Holy Flame Totem, which does actually give curse immunity if they walk onto it for a brief second. So that part is actually really nice about Holy Flame Totem. And they also get a lot of regen out of the Zealotry. So they actually have not come anywhere close to dying, but if you are doing Uber Elder, I would definitely recommend to try your hardest to cap their resistances, because the Shaper Beam does all damage types. I was talking with Kayla about this earlier, and Kayla was saying that with Minion Res Jewels, Uber Elder became substantially easier, and they died way less. It was just a lot better for them. +1 Spectre boots with crafted move speed and life. I used Pristine and Bound to get these. These actually took me an annoying amount of attempts to get, mostly because of the fact that Bound Fossils are really expensive in hardcore right now, thanks to Herald of Agony being the 3rd most popular build on Hardcore Legion. Basically just wanted pretty decent life. I actually got more than I wanted with this. I actually got a really good roll for the life, and I even got Chaos Res. I chose to craft movement speed and cannot be chilled for the purposes of doing Shaper or Uber Elder, and just for general dealing with annoyances of getting chilled. Going back to the Molten Shell part, I have 7.7k armor, and with a Granite up, I have 15k armor, which means that my normal Molten Shell gives 3,500 shield. My Val Molten Shell gives 10.5k. So, yeah. Val Molten Shell is a pretty good skill. And basically when I use Val Molten Shell is generally for finishing bosses, or what I feel like I need to hit. Like I might take some serious damage, then I will hit my Val Molten Shell. And for Legions, as soon as the mobs unfreeze, I will hit my Granite and press Val Molten Shell. And I will still try to dodge things, I will still try to keep my Vigilance Strike up, but generally speaking, that keeps me safe. I have only had one case where my Val Molten Shell was completely depleted, and it was in a single damage mob map with 40% reduced armor. So my Val Molten Shell only was absorbing like 6k, I ran into a whole bunch of Maracas, and they managed to deplete my Val Molten Shell. And yet, without maybe hitting my Life Flask once, I was still full HP. So, Val Molten Shell, pretty good. Highly recommend. Passive tree. Already mentioned the jewel. I'm using Anatomical Knowledge for a bunch of life. You could get more damage here if you wanted with an Abyss Jewel, as well as more minion res. I ideally, next level, will probably respec a couple points to get another jewel socket to do that instead, though. Unending Hunger, if you're not using this on a Spectre build and you have access to it, you're insane, because Soul Eater is a pretty good thing to have, as anybody who has ever seen somebody use a Headhunter or has used a Headhunter can tell you. Soul Eater is pretty good. So, yeah, get that. It's OP. Vigil, again, used in order to have my Fortify be more reliable from Vigilance Strike and give my minions Fortify. Very, very powerful and very useful. Even normal builds use it sometimes. It's a very good skill. Other than that, pathing out this way, just because, amazingly, these minion damage nodes aren't even that efficient. Pathing like this, because it's a little more efficient, this jewel actually turns out to be a 3-point jewel. No matter how you look at it, really. This is actually technically a 3-point jewel. So, not all that efficient. This is obviously needed for the +1 Spectre. Life, damage, minion survivability, damage, and attack speed applying to you. I don't really grab this because it's not all that much damage. And it also increases the damage that you deal, which actually makes things like Fizz Reflect a little scary. I actually did almost kill myself once on a minion build by shield charging into a pack because shield charge has so much added fizz. And I have hurt myself on other characters not using shield charge, so that's something to note. Kind of funny. I don't think I would kill myself on Fizz Reflect even if I had this, but I mean, something to think about if you're ever using shield charge. More damage. Again, cast speed, attack speed, pretty good. I would probably even get this eventually. The 2% life leech that you get up here actually isn't that much, or 0.2%. Really wish this was more, or wish there was some like leech rate or something. But then again, these guys cast pretty fast. More life, again, going into the Marauder for more armor. Soul of Steel, pretty good. I think everybody knows this by now. Also gives some resistances. Life is a pretty good stat. Life is a pretty good stat. Armor is a pretty good stat. And I'm getting Art of the Gladiator to get more dex, more attack speed, and get some movement speed by making it so that this doesn't have a movement speed penalty. Very nice to have. So that pretty much sums it up. These two are kind of temporary nodes. I'll probably switch those out for like a jewel socket or something. We'll see. Not sure what exactly I'm going to do with that, but I would like to have more jewel sockets because that is the majority of your damage for the Spectres at this point. Also should go over the flask. Ignite, removal, Divine Life Flask. Ignites are scary, dude. Ignites are actually pretty scary. So yeah, I can actually recommend this a lot if you have the open suffix for it. Bleed removal, Granite, shock removal, Basalt. Shock will also kill you. Highly recommend getting shock removal if you can, because basically if a lightning hit does like 720 lightning damage to me, that's a maximum damage shock. That's a 50% shock right there, and that means I'm taking 50% more damage all of a sudden. So yeah. If you can fit shock removal on, it's going to increase your survivability substantially. Freeze removal, I mean, that's obvious. Curse removal, I mean, that's obvious. And the flask chosen, Quicksilver, obvious. Silver flask, just to move faster. You can replace this with something like a quartz flask. I'm considering it. But I kind of like the silver flask because it lets me burst a little bit more movement speed. Basalt flask, I mean, having higher fizz damage reduction is nice. That would put me at 25. And Granite, again, we're using Val Molten Shell. If you're not using a Granite with Val Molten Shell, you're insane. Or you have a ton of armor already. And yeah. Pantheons. Lunaris is the good generic mapping one. Solaris is the one you take if you want to upgrade this and take this for Uber Elder. But this is the best generic mapping one. It is worth noting that the chain projectiles is slightly misleading sometimes. You still need to be very careful whenever things like Orb of Storms goats show up. So do not run Goatman chain maps because Orb of Storms actually really hurts with chain. But yeah, this is also your generic mapping one. I would fully upgrade Solaris for things like delving outside of chain zones or for Uber Elder. Soul of Shikari gives us immunity to poison. Poison really fucking hurts. If you've ever been poisoned by legions too, it hurts. And it just gives the reduced chaos damage taken. If you're not in the chaos damage zone, I forget what it's called in Delve. Soul of Yugal is really nice. Also, Yugal is the best one for Uber Elder. Really helps. And yeah. Also worth noting, for dealing with stuns, Warrior's Blood is actually really nice. It increases our stun threshold, which means we need to take more damage in order to get stunned. This stat is really good, and I really wish there was more of it. Yeah. Anyways, that's about it, I think. I think I explained just about everything. If you're wondering how I summon Spectres, the previous video should explain that pretty well. Holy crap, this ended up being 27 minutes. I did not expect this to take this long. But there was a lot of interesting mechanics that I needed to explain, so sorry about that. Anyways, there might be some future updates to this build. I am not finished with this fully yet, but I wanted to explain all of my choices pretty much in depth. Yeah. Anyways, thanks for watching. This is really signing off. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys later. So one thing I forgot to mention is my Animate Guardians gear. The most important thing is a helmet that's got a metallic fossil on it. You can use a low level one to make it easier to get. This basically has the stat Nearby enemies have 9% reduced lightning resistance, so this adds a little bit of extra damage. It is also using Dying Breath. I plan on replacing this with Kingmaker. And the rest of it's just pretty crap. Blood Bond, very cheap. Boots, you can just grab some like temple ones that have some dodge or something like that. Get some resistances on it so that it has heavy overcaps on elemental resistance. And gloves, I'm currently using just resistance ones. You could use something with like ally weak on hit that's been corrupted randomly, just with crappy stats. And or you could just use Southbound for more life. Blood Bond is technically not the best chest. You could use Growth Coals, but that's expensive and super rare, so I find it kind of annoying to use. I am planning on a higher end Guardian setup with Kingmaker and all of that, because something that costs a lot more to make, but I have not finished the planning on that yet, and so that will come at a later point.